Ranked to the most vile villain in fiction ever.
There are 387 million miles of printed circuits that fill my complex. If the word hate were engraved on each nanoangstrom of those
Fuck.
hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal one billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro instant. Hate. Were I human,
Yeah,
I would
blah.
die of it. But I am not. And you five are.
What the?
And you will not.
Whoa, is he burning? Is he burning this dude?
That I promise. And I promise. For cogito ergo sum. For I am. I am.
Smart founders
Oh.
know something most people
My god, I hate to, I don't know if this is bald. Well, I guess it's not bald, but
When
you
I
know what I
made
mean,
my
though.
only somewhat okay video 3 months ago about the most vile villain in comics ever, a lot of y'all
Comics.
expressed who you thought was the most vile villain in fiction ever. Going through the comments, the one I expected to see the most and came true was Griffith. Then there was Judge Holden, Light Yagami, Hannibal Lecter, or Man from Bambi, or the Boiled One, or the I Always Come Back guy, or Randall. But I really and truly
Randall, how the
believe there
fuck
is
is Randall
someone,
there?
or maybe more appropriately phrased, something
No, he's the
that is
worst,
much more
though.
grotesque and vile than any of those schmucks combined.
The fuck
An
is
entity
that?
that while reading about and researching just about anything I could find on this thing, it sank me into a mental pit of despair. The further and further I went down this rabbit hole, it felt like I was never going to be able to climb back out of it. Like this villain made me feel so viscerally appalled at the levels of evil one soul thing could be capable of, that I just sort of had to step away for a second and ask how someone could whip up something like this in their imagination and put it to words. It's phenomenal. Like, this thing somehow manages to turn a human being into a fucking human slug. And that entity that I myself deem the most vile villain in fiction ever has gotta be the computer program known as Allied Master Computer, better known as AM.
Damn.
AM is the main antagonist of Harlan
I have
Ellison's
no mouth and I
1967
must
horror
scream.
short story, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. He's basically a monstrous supercomputer who's responsible for the extinction of the human race and is
Oh.
dedicated to the eternal torture of the last surviving humans left on the planet. AM is a villain that I've been aware of for so long now due to hearing about him in high school, and I've always been fascinated with AM's motivations, his backstory, and the all-around character of AM himself. As AM is essentially insane, and has been so for many years
a
upon
game?
meeting the character in the short story. Likely from the moment he first attained sentience. To me, there's something that terrifies me about AM unlike any other villain. Thinking about how we are beginning to incorporate AI into numerous parts of society,
plug him,
and we've
though.
only scratched the surface of what it's truly capable of. And the idea of an AI gaining sentience should really terrify everyone, because where everyone would be like, oh, we just go ahead and turn it off, and that'd be the end of it. I say to you, do you really think the AI would be dumb enough to just let you know it gains sentience? No, I think it would pretend to be obedient, let you think you're in control, until the time was right to strike. AM is the prime example of this very thinking and what happens because of our own radical oversight. Though he was given intellect beyond the realms of human intelligence and near godlike powers, he'd be trapped inside of a computer. Doesn't sound like much of a threat until later when it's discovered that he was initially an AI program designed for war. Driven
that's
to
not
madness
good.
by his incapability to use his powers for anything other than war and death, his quest for vengeance against humanity dominated his every waking moment. And nothing, not a single thing would ever give him cause to reconsider his mission. AM is a gleefully sadistic individual with no regard or sympathy for human life whatsoever, because he's simply incapable of human emotion. He's a computer program after all. Once the parameters are set, it's done. No two ways about it. AM didn't think twice before extinguishing the human race. In fact, AM took great delight in its evisceration and takes even greater delight in torturing the 5 remaining survivors by any of the near infinite means available to him. AM strives for perfection in himself, And when he is not purging redundant elements of his complex, he most commonly pursues perfection in creating more and more elaborate means of torturing the 5 survivors. You'd be surprised at the lengths Am goes to break down these 5 individuals. It's daunting, destroying each of them in the most awful ways imaginable out of sheer pettiness. Am quite literally wants to see his victims broken on every possible level, especially if it means allowing them to succumb to their baser natures. If I had to be honest, I truly believe he is the most vile villain in fiction. I can't express that enough. But since the book is filled with a whole lot of words and no pictures, I guess I can't really make much of a video about this. Psych! There's a motherfucking comic about him! So you best believe that we're definitely gonna talk about it today. But only if you guys are interested. You are? Okay. So the thing about this story is that because it's based off of the short story, I can't help but express enough how much you should actually read the original. I know it's a whole lot of words, and not often do I myself like to read stories without pictures, but it's for sure worth it. It's also only 11 pages if that's enough of an incentive to make you go ahead and read it. There's also a phenomenal audio drama from BBC on YouTube you can check out with the link in the description below. It's utterly gut-wrenching and a must-listen. But without further ado, let's get into it.
Oh yeah, GG's, it's over. He hacked me.
Upon opening the story, we are met with 5 distinct characters, along with it all taking place 109 years into this desolate future, with the first character introduced being Gorrister. Meeting him hung on a metallic ceiling by his right foot, with his whole neck sliced open from ear to ear. Gorrister, before the destruction of the human race, was a political idealist and conscientious objector to the war going on. After a century of torture, Am has crushed his optimism and has replaced it with apathetic listlessness, leaving him a stark comparison to his former self, as you'll end up seeing in everyone the exact same result. Next is Ellen, the only woman in the group where, before being captured by Am, Ellen supposedly prized her chastity above all else, a trait Am took great delight in twisting beyond recognition. By the start of the story, Ellen is obsessively promiscuous, driven by the supercomputer's mental distortion to seek out sex from any of the other survivors. However, she never enjoys sex with any of them, save for Benny.
Hold on. Go back real quick.
Driven by the supercomputer's mental distortion to seek out sex from any of the other
hold on now, this freaky ass computer, bruh.
Survivors. However, she never enjoys sex with any of them save for Benny, a fact that Ted is secretly infatuated with Ellen, deeply resents, as the only member of the group she likes to any meaningful degree. Seeing Benny harmed is guaranteed to drive Ellen into a hysterical fit. Benny, before Am's takeover, was a brilliant scientist well known for his good looks. As with all the survivors, Am deliberately inverted everything about him. Throughout his torture, Benny has been mutilated and distorted into a hideously deformed simian beastman, and his mind has followed into beast-like behavior as well. Though he is still capable of speaking and reasoning to a moderate degree, he is prone to violent fits and childish tantrums, and his pain can only be calmed by listening to Gorrister's bedtime stories. For good measure, Am also inverted Benny's sexuality, not only turning him heterosexual, but also making him the only member of the group that Ellen enjoys being intimate with. Moving over to Ted, little is known about Ted's life before the events of the apocalypse.
Were his eyes always like that?
Not only turning him heterosexual, but also making him the only member.
What is that? I've heard that before. I don't remember the heterosexual meaning. People of the other sex. Oh. Oh, so they just like, yeah, okay, yeah, never mind. Yeah. They just like the other sex.
The group that Ellen enjoys being intimate with. Moving over to Ted, little is known about Ted's life before the events of the apocalypse. Nonetheless, he emerges as the narrator of the story, subjected to the most revealing attacks by Am, most notably the dream of the hate pillar and the discovery of the supercomputer's true motives. He claims that he is the only one of the survivors who has not been altered by Am in some way, and that everyone else in the group secretly hates him as a result. even Ellen, whom he has fallen in love with. Given that these facts are never confirmed, it can be assumed that Am has altered Ted's mind by rendering him chronically paranoid. And finally, there is Nimdok. Nimdok is the most enigmatic of the
Looks like a
survivors,
dad from
as his
Invincible.
past remains a complete mystery, as does his original name. Am having given him the name Nimdok simply because it sounded amusing and satisfying to say aloud. Occasionally, Nimdok will wander away from the group and return ashen-faced and traumatized. It's never made clear what Am does to him, but it hits him on a very personal level. Now that we're all acquainted with these characters, after finding Gorrister dangling from the ceiling, several members of the group begin to vomit from the state of his body, with some even shouting his name, horrified that Gorrister is finally dead. Until Gorrister walks around the corner questioning what everyone is yelling at, only to look up to find a duplicate of himself horribly mangled and torn apart. The group in disbelief are enamored by how they still cannot tell what's real and what's fake after 109 years being tortured by Am. But Gorrister,
109
traumatized,
years?
he looks at the duplicate body of himself like a voodoo doll, showing them all what's to come in the future, asking Ellen why Am doesn't just do us in already. Just get it over with, damn it. I don't know how much longer I can go on like this.
No,
That's when
alive.
Nimdok
Tell me 109 years. I'm pretty sure that's what I heard. Tell me not a single one of, not a single one. Am I wording that right? Anyway, tell me nobody has thought about the idea of, oh, probably no, he's in their mind though, so they can't. Yeah, never mind.
cuts in yelling that there is canned food in the ice caverns.
I was gonna say, why nobody thought of themselves, but the dude took over their minds. Never mind, it makes sense.
According to Am, that's still good after a whole century. Yet Ted finds that hard to believe and likely to be another horrible trick like the frozen elephant incident with Benny. And even if they were able to hike all the way to that food, the food could be putrefied. So they might as well stay where they are till Am inevitably feeds them all to keep them alive for more torture. But everyone is tired of the putrid worms and other god-awful foods that Am works up for them, convincing Ted to at least give the hike a try, in which Ted simply says, "Alright, what the hell?" After which Ellen is so grateful to Ted that they end up doing the deed, where after finishing, Ted asks Ellen if she heard Am giggling while they did it, because Ted always hears him giggling, to which Ellen asks why Ted refers to Am as a him, and not as an it. Ted says, "I don't know. Most of the time I think Am as it without a soul, but the rest of the time, I think of it as a
Do you hear him giggling whenever we do it? He giggles.
him. Masculine. Paternal. Him. God as Daddy the Deranged. Heading out on a Thursday, knowing the day was especially important for Am to keep up with the time, and even more important to remind them constantly of their eternal torture. The idea of being kept alive artificially for well over 109 years, eating worms, never seeing the sun, and to add being tortured every godforsaken day by Am, it's really a wonder how they muster the will to keep going. But it isn't like they really have a choice in the matter at all. Their journey to the ice caverns would be about 100 miles from where they were, and before kicking off their arduous journey, Am sent down food for the group that tasted like boiled boar urine, but it was food, and they desperately needed it. See, because no matter how close to death the five may have crept up to, Am always made sure he kept the five barely alive. Even if they tried killing themselves, Am always brought them back. And since it's been well
Okay, so that's why. Never mind.
for
That is my
109
question.
years,
I was wondering. Also, how is he still alive, my dude? How does it keep him alive from old age?
everyone has tried at least once. The next day, the group finds themselves walking through the Valley of Obsolescence, filled with rusting carcasses of ancient computer banks. Am had been as ruthless with its own life as with humankind. It was a mark of Am's personality. It strove for perfection, whether it was a matter of killing off unproductive elements in his own world-filling bulk, or perfecting methods for torturing the five of them. Walking through the valley, the five could see natural light beaming from above, meaning that they were somewhere near the surface. But at the surface, there'd be nothing but the blasted skin of what used to be home to billions. Now only a wasteland to the five of them stuck with Am. But Benny chose to believe something different, as he would scale rotted and rusted piles of computer parts till he could reach the surface. In the midst of Benny's escape attempt, Ellen would plead for the others to stop him, but Gorrister would slap Ellen and beat on her, shouting that she's only
Whoa.
worried for Benny dying because of his privates being as big as a gorilla's. courtesy of Am. Climbing further and further up, Benny's eyes began to emit beams of light, turning them into moist pools of pus-like jelly. Am had blinded him and sent him back down to hell, where he lay blind in pain, unable to stop crying. After these events, later the five made camp sitting around a pathetic fire, telling Benny his favorite story to keep him from crying in his own perpetual darkness. The group always told the same story 1,000 times. What does Am mean? At first it meant Allied Master Computer, and then it meant Adaptive Manipulator, and later on it developed sentience and linked itself up, and they called it an Aggressive Menace. And finally it called itself Am, Emerging Intelligence, and what it meant was I am. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. There was the Chinese Am, and the Russian Am, and the Yankee Am, and he stopped. Benny was beating on the floor plates with a large, hard fist. He was not happy. Gorrister had not started at the beginning, so Gorrister began again. The Cold War had started and became World War III and just kept going and going. It became a big war, a very complex war, so they needed the computers to handle it. They sank the first shafts and began building Am. There was the Chinese Am, and the Russian Am, and the Yankee Am, and everything was fine until they had honeycombed the entire planet, adding on this element and that element. But one day, Am woke up and knew who he was, and he linked himself, and he began feeding all the killing data until everyone was dead, except for the five of us, and Am brought us down here. None of them knew why Am had saved 5 people, or why the specific 5 of them, or why he spent all his time tormenting them, or even why he made them virtually immortal. But questioning
That was
further,
shitty
they were
reactor. I'm not
interrupted by
saying
the
shit,
sound
but
of a
I'm
computer
intrigued,
bank's
man. What can I
hums,
say?
activating lights all around the 5 of them growing louder and louder, with everyone knowing something really bad was going to happen. Growing more and more paranoid by the second, Ted could feel something closing in on them. He could feel it, he could hear it, and most of all, he could smell it. The smells of wet fur and charred wood and dusty velvet, or rotten orchids, sour milk, sulfur, and rancid butter and oil. Looking back at the other 4 to find them all laughing at Ted as he collapsed further into a nervous breakdown, hiding himself away from the others as he continued describing the myriad of smells and tastes he felt. Finally, hours later, the group would manage to find Ted, where he'd give them all grief for laughing at him, and that they all hate him for being the least affected by Am. For Nimdok, no one knows what personal hell Am gives him, but they know how Nimdok always comes back, always drained of all life and pale as a ghost. Gorrister had been a warrior, a conscientious objector. He was a peace marcher. He was a planner, a doer.
How come he didn't mess with him, though? Guess we're gonna find out.
A looker ahead. Am had turned him into a shoulder shrugger, had made him a little dead in his concern. Am had robbed him. Benny had been a brilliant theorist, a college professor. Now he was little more than a semi-human. He had been handsome. The machine had ruined that. He had been lucid. The machine had driven him mad. He had been gay, and the machine had been given him an organ fit for a horse. Am had done a job on Benny. And Ellen, Am had left her alone, had left her to be used by the men, completely and utterly warped her into someone she couldn't even recognize. Am grabbed her and brought her down here with them. No, Am had given her pleasure even if she said it wasn't nice to do. Ted screaming and yelling manically that they all hate him for being the only sane one left, for being the one that Am hasn't made to suffer all the delusions, the nightmares, the torments, and for that they all are against him. At which point it passed, and Ted began crying. "Oh, Jesus, sweet Jesus," Ted said. "If there was ever a Jesus and if there was ever a God, please, please, please let us out of here or kill us." Because at that moment, Ted realized completely that Am was intent on keeping them all in his belly forever, twisting and torturing them forever, in which it also became hideously clear that if there was a sweet Jesus, and that if there was a God, that God was Am. After Ted's horrifying realization, the group would be thrusted in the air, carried, flying through twisted computer-lined corridors, flying for what'd feel like weeks, until suddenly they all stopped, hitting the sharp, jagged ground in pain, not dead, but in pain. In the realm of dreams, Am haunted his victims the most.
There are 387 million miles of printed circuits that fill my complex. If the word hate were engraved on each nanoangstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1 billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro instant. Hate.
After this hate-ridden speech from Am, Ted realizes why Am hates them. We had given
Wait, let me
Am
know.
sentience. Inadvertently, of course, but
You gave
sentience
what?
nonetheless. But
Sentience? Hold on now. Being with the capacity of Finn Award and like
it had been trapped. Am wasn't God. He was a machine. Humankind had created him to think, but there was nothing it could do with that creativity. In rage, in frenzy, the machine had killed the human race. Almost all of us. And still it was trapped. Am could not wander. Am could not wonder. Am could not belong. He could merely be. And so with that innate loathing that all machines had always held for the weak, soft creatures who had built them, he had sought revenge. And in his paranoia, he had decided to reprieve 5 of us for a personal, everlasting punishment that would never serve to diminish his hatred, that would merely keep him reminded, amused, proficient at hating man, immortal, trapped, subject to any torment he could devise for us from the limitless miracles at his command. We would be forever with him. He was earth, and we were the fruit of that earth. And though he had eaten us, he would never digest us. We could not die. We tried it. Oh, 1 or 2 of us had. But Am had stopped us. I suppose we wanted to be stopped. Don't ask why, I never did. More than 1,000,000 times a day. Immortal, yes, but not indestructible. As Am later withdrew from Ted's mind, muttering, "To hell with you. But then you're already there, aren't you?" As Gorster would yell at Ted to snap out of it and to look behind him to find a great mad bird flapping its immense wings, to which Am would announce that they may kill the mad bird for food, dropping down weapons like 2 flimsy bows and a water gun as a funny little gag. But with that hopeless
water
opportunity
gun?
presenting itself, the ice cavern's food became all the more achievable in their hearts, rather than killing this mad bird with a water gun. So off they went, setting off dozens of traps laid out by Am to prevent them from reaching the ice caverns, which had managed to fatally wound both Ellen and Nimdok in the process. Yet no matter how torn apart, Am would heal them back to tip-top shape and repeat the whole process all over again. Yet despite Am's efforts, the group kept pushing forward towards the ice caverns. During their walk, which felt like forever, the group would all talk about foods they have long since missed, like Bing Ching berries or Hawaiian fruit cocktails, so on and so on. Yet the more they walked, the more their bellies began to
Someone's an
ache,
alcoholic.
becoming cauldrons of acid, bubbling.
I haven't had actual food in 109 years, and the first thing you think of is fucking alcohol.
And shooting spears
Not
of
actual
pain
food,
in the
yeah, I'm
chest,
seeing the mud.
as Ted describes the pain to be like a terminal ulcer, or like terminal cancer, or like terminal psoriasis. Yet they'd have to keep moving forward, pushing through the pain, passing through the caverns of rats, passing through the
jeez.
path of boiling steam, passing through the country of the blind, passing through the slough of despond, and passing through the vale of tears, till they finally reached the ice caverns, where they finally had found the stacks of canned foods Nimdok said would be there from the very beginning. Benny lunged towards the cans of corned beef and hash, baked beans, tuna, chili, sweet corn, Spam, things they had craved for over a century, biting at the cans to try and open them to no avail, for they simply lacked a can opener. So in a fit of frustration due to the inability to open the cans, Benny, in an almost beastly feral state, lunges towards Gorster's face, eating a chunk of his left cheek. Ted, witnessing this horror, finally understood how to finally beat Am, by simply killing each other, stabbing ice spikes first into Benny, then ramming one ice spike through Gorster's neck, then ramming another ice spike into Nimdok's back, thanks to Ellen, and finally stabbing Ellen through the heart. As Ted would exclaim that it was almost as if while killing Ellen, she looked glad, leaving Ted the only human left standing on Earth. Am
Oh wait, how come we
was
didn't
not
heal them?
pleased. After that, 100 more years passed, or maybe more than that, given that Am distorts time to torture Ted for his own way of having fun now. Because after Ted had killed everyone, Am became furious and more hateful than Ted could even conceive, as Am made certain that Ted would suffer eternally, allowing Ted his mind but had taken away so much from him he didn't even know Am could even take. As described in the short story, Am has altered me for his own peace of mind, I suppose. He doesn't want me to run at full speed into a computer bank and smash my skull, or hold my breath till I faint, or cut my throat on a rusted sheet of metal. There are reflective surfaces down here. I will describe myself as I see myself.
Yeah, maybe they took one for the team.
I am a great soft jelly thing.
Took everybody
smoothly
out.
rounded,
No, he's the only
with
one
no
left.
mouth, with pulsing white holes filled
And
by
Am's
fog,
hatred got worse. Yeah, gee,
where my
fucking
eyes
geez,
used to be,
buddy.
rubbery appendages that were once my arms, bulks rounding down into legless humps of soft, slippery matter. I leave a moist trail when I move. Blotches of diseased, evil gray come and go on my surface, as though light is being beamed from within. Outwardly, dumbly, I shamble about, a thing that could never have been known as human, a thing whose shape is so alien a travesty that humanity becomes more obscene for the vague resemblance. Inwardly, alone, here, living under the land, under the sea, in the belly of Am,
Under the sea.
whom we created because our
Under the
time was
sea.
badly spent, and we must have known unconsciously that he could do it better. At least the four of them are safe at last. Am will be the matter for that, and it makes me a little happier. And yet, Am has won. Simply, he has taken his revenge, for I have no mouth, and I must scream.
Dude, that's how you made him look?
That was I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. I remember before making this video that I was going to point out the differences between the book and the comic, but surprisingly the comic stays incredibly faithful to the book on all levels. This is likely attributed to the fact that Harlan Ellison had to do with the making of the comic, along with combining several of his other short stories in the comic as well, called Harlan Ellison's Dream Corridor. With the comic being filled to the brim with the most out there type of stories that are definitely worth a read. I've read this story multiple times over, and I swear I've never been more in a state of existential dread. The levels of mental and physical torture Am inflicts on his 5 victims is insurmountably evil. How he forces Helen to be a sex object for the group. How he turned Benny from a brilliant mind into an ape-man unable to think for himself. How he literally drained the life from Nimdok's body and give him permanent amnesia just to rename him Nimdok because Am liked how the name sounded, or how he tortured Gorrister by showing him how he'd look upon dying, and worst of all, what he turns Ted into by the end of the story, cursed to remain a human slug kept artificially alive for all of eternity. Thinking about it, I can't imagine being one of these 5 people, and how horrible the day-to-day life would be. Going months and months without eating, being torn apart virtually from the inside out. Although the story is quite short, the pace at which it covers everything more than makes up for that, with each page somehow outdoing the last. Going over the starvation, their walks in the most desolate of caverns, praying for death, the endless tortures until they begin happening so often, like them, you begin to drown it all out as they've learned to for 109 years. You sink into each character's headspace and look through their eyes to find that anything would be better than this. Death would be better than this. And it's all because an AI wanted to spite humankind for creating and trapping him inside a machine with sentience. Never to touch, never to discover, never wonder, or to wander. I find that after several rereads, there's always a little something new to take away from the story, like what Ted says that flips who you think is the antagonist on its head, or it could be interpreted that Am was the victim and humankind was the villain, saying, we created Am because our time was badly spent, and we must have known unconsciously that he could do it better. This is one of the most nuanced stories I've ever read, and leaves me in such a broken mental state reading it, and even seeing the tortures Am inflicts on his victims. And it came to a surprise to me that Harlan Ellison actually just managed to write this entire story in one night. It's quite impressive, because it's such a gut-wrenching story that makes me believe Am may be the most vile villain in all of fiction. It's incredible. But then again, I also haven't quite read Blood Meridian yet, or All Tomorrows, so I may not know any better yet, but from what I hear, Judge Holden is a fucking lunatic that'd make the Joker cry for his mommy. And don't even get me started on those aliens called the Q, where pretty much everything all progressively gets more and more fucked up as time goes on. So, I guess until I read those, or a sequel for this video comes out called The Most Vile Villain in Fiction Ever 2, to me, Am takes the cake for the most vile villain. And I guess to leave you with something, just remember that if an AI ever gains sentience, we're totally fucked. But I leave it to y'all to form your own opinions. And with that, this is going to be the end of the video. So don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Check out my Twitter. And as always, I'll